topic of my show is US imperialism then versus now. And the most concerned topic right now for us is US interference in domestic politics of other countries. Why it is important for us, being a Pakistani, I'm seeing a politically unstable country, and a lot of concerns are because of US as well. How young scholars see these two different topics, not actually two different, but they're interconnected with each other. So what is their perception as per their reading, as per their observation and analysis? We'll talk to them. But first of all, I'd like to introduce both of my distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to introduce ZHANG Sheng. He's a graduate in Middle Eastern Studies program from Harvard University. He's a researcher and young scholar associated with multiple international think tanks. He's also a research fellow of Chengdu Institute of World Affairs, which is one of the well-known think tank on international relations and South Asian studies based in Chengdu, Sichuan province, China. He's also Honorary Expert Advisor of the Jeevraj Ashrit Foundation, Research Fellow on the International Peace Institute-Nepal, and lecturer at the Kathmandu School of Law, which is based in Nepal. He has also published several academic and different political articles and papers, and he had been always on air on multiple international news channels. Some are very well-known channels like CGTN, RT America, Arab, Al-Ghad, and these are some of the channels where we've seen Chang as an expert and as an analyst. So I'm glad to have him on my show as well. Now I'm going to introduce another young scholar who's Clayton Boylan. He's basically from US, and he graduated from George Washington University with a degree in political science. Now he's a full scholar from Renmin University, China, and his degree is in Chinese studies, global politics, and law. He has a comprehensive understanding of both mainstream Chinese and US policy, and has been credited as one of the foremost youth scholar on Sino-US relations. He's a history and culture specialist. He's an activist and union man. He was part of the Industrial Workers of the World, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Students for the Justice in Palestine, and was a founder of the International Students Front. During the fascist attack, he was among the volunteer first responders. They played an essential role tending to the wounds until the ambulances arrived. And I would just like to close this introduction. There's so much my guests have done already, but I'm trying to summarize the introduction. And another interesting thing about Clayton is that he's a world traveler. He had been to 50 different countries on 5 continents. Currently, he's working as a lecturer and writer. And my favorite part of his introduction is, I must say that he's a proud anti-imperialist. And that is why we're going to talk on imperialism then versus now, as well as US regime change and interference of US in domestic politics of other countries. So first of all, I would like to ask you, Clayton, being a US citizen, being from US, but still being very balanced about the world, talking about peace, harmony, and stability around the globe, talking about humanity, and how do you see current political instability in Pakistan? What is this all political instability about? Because people have been talking about US regime change in Pakistan, but still we have 2 categories or 2 different classes of people in Pakistan. One which believe that yes, US interference was clear, and they ousted Prime Minister Imran Khan with the so-called vote of no confidence motion. And then there's another people which are probably pro-US, and they say that no, there was not a particular issue like that, something like that. It was basically a conspiracy theory. How do you see this personally?
Well, there's always going to be people who say, "Oh no, it's a conspiracy theory. Don't think too much about it." But at the same time, give it 63 years. I believe that's the amount of time before the Office of the Historian ratifies all information and releases it officially. And so back then, we were just talking about Allende. When Allende was overturned, there were people within the Chilean right wing who were like, "No, we're not pro-US. We're not incumbent to the United States." But at the same time, then you go into it 60 years later, because now we have the information. Now that information is finally published, and what do we see? We see the US buying out media corporations. We see the US giving certain nations to certain politicians. And so is it really that far-fetched to think that the same might be happening in Pakistan? I don't think so. I think it's a very rational thing to thing to bring up. I mean, we were talking about the same thing in Hong Kong. Yeah, sure, some of those people in Hong Kong might be protesting because of themselves, because of how they feel. But there was also a money track behind the scenes from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is basically the Central Intelligence Agency's public wing. And they were funneling money into the Hong Kong protests. And for the longest time, for the first year or so, everyone denied it. Everyone pretended like if you brought that up, you were crazy. But then what happens is a year later, the National Endowment for Democracy releases their annual spendings. And what do they say? They say they gave several hundred thousands of dollars to pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. So
yeah,
it is not a conspiracy theory. It's very plausible.
So how do you see this when we compare it with imperialism? Do you see some connection between control or regime change, or maybe governing someone else, foreign policy, interfering in someone else, some other state domestic affairs? Do you connect it with imperialism somehow?
For sure. It's just an adapting form of imperialism. It was like back then, the Portuguese, especially when the Portuguese were dominating people, they realized that they had a giant flaw in that Portugal is a small country, just like Britain. It's a relatively small country. And they didn't have nearly the manpower nor the expertise to, if they were to conquer a large swath of land, they had nowhere near the amount of manpower to hold it and to actually govern it effectively. They could only just take little port cities. And so that's what these did for most of their empire. They just bombarded coastal cities, and then they sent in a swarm of troops to take over these key coastal cities, and they just remained there. And that was the Portuguese Empire. And they eventually started to falter, and they became replaced by other empires, because other empires were using different strategies, were using more cunning strategies. They weren't like the Portuguese and just going in and putting up a flag in any fort. No, what the British did was they go to someone else's fort. They go to a fort of someone in India. They go to an Indian warlord, and they propose a mutual alliance. That's not really mutual, and that was them being subservient to the British crown, but they believed they had some sort of level of autonomy. Similarly, I bet you the new Prime Minister of Pakistan believes he has some sort of level of autonomy. He believes he is acting on his own. But in reality, that's not what the US thinks. Just like the British didn't think that the Nepalese kings were acting on their autonomy. They were not. They were a part of the system. They were a valuable part of the system.
Exactly. Really great point you've made. And this is what some of the intellectuals from Pakistan also say, that. But they're actually being criticized by the people, which maybe we say are leftists in our country, or maybe pseudo-liberals. They always criticize them for this stance. Chang, what's your take on current political instability in Pakistan, and how do you see that Prime Minister Imran Khan was ousted under US regime change, and this is not something which happened in the world for the first time?
Yes, and I have to emphasize that the United States has been doing similar things for many years, and then we can trace it back to, let's say, at least to 1950s. In 1950s, the United States did the same thing in Latin America, and then they did the same thing to Iran when democratic elected leader Mossadegh was overthrown and were replaced by the more like pro-US dictatorship of the Shah. And then in 1970s, as Clayton mentioned, United States did the same thing in Chile when the democratically elected leader of Allende, he was overthrown, and he was replaced by the US-supported military leader with Pinochet. And the United States has been doing that thing for at least 70 years already. And then they have been doing that in recent years as well. I was mentioning that if you look at the very recent interview of John Bolton, which served as Donald Trump administration's major policy maker of U.S. foreign policy, he was admitting that. He literally said this on TV show. He said, "Oh, as a person who does plan regime change abroad, whatever something. So he admits that he's a person who often think about how to promote regime change and coup d'etats abroad. And then, of course, we would not expect any sort of difference between the Biden administration and the Donald Trump administration. It's just a Donald Trump administration people, they are out of work right now and then admit what they have done, while the current administration of the Biden administration, they want to hide what they're doing and they don't say that. And so like we clearly see that it's not the first time the US has done the same thing. And that it's not the first time the US used the same trick. And US has been doing the same trick since the 1950s to very, very, very recent. And in Latin America, in Middle East, they have been doing that. And they have been overthrowing democratic leaders for many times. And if you remember after the Arab Spring, you know, like when Morsi was democratically elected as the president of Egypt, he was also later like faced the coup d'etat, and it was Americans feeling like, oh, he was a democratically elected leader, but he was not serving the U.S. interests enough. And then they feel like, oh, it's better to support a military government that is not as democratic elected, but serving the U.S. interests as more. And the United States chose to find the people who like serve their interest more than like to choose over like democraticness, like democratic essence of the government. And it's not the first time the United States has been doing this. And this is basically the most blatant version of imperialism, because when we talk about what is imperialism, like one superpower of the world crossing half of the globe and then to sort of intervene with domestic politics of another country, another developing country, that's imperialism. And one country trying to impose its own national interest over the democratic will of the local people, over the basic sovereignty and integrity of the local country, over the very basic national interest of the local country. Those things are imperialism. Those things are totally imperialism. That basically classical definition of imperialism that you can find in any sort of books. So what we find today is that United States has been doing this thing for like 70 years already. They have been doing that in recent years, and there's like abundant evidence show that the current coup happening is also in Pakistan is also very, very, very closely related to Americans. And as Imran Khan himself, like 1 week before he faced the removal, he was warning the people that Americans want me to be removed. Americans are going to try to do whatever they do. And right now, it seems like Americans succeeded by doing that, at least for now. And
exactly.
Yeah, so we can totally believe that it's a one of the American plots, and such a plot is basic on a definition of imperialism.
Chang, how do you see when Prime Minister Imran Khan said that the reason why US have been doing that, as both of you also said the same point, gave me the point that whoever goes against the interest of US still wants to control it, and US want their policies to be altered as per US wants. So Imran Khan kept on saying that just because I'm going for an independent foreign policy, that is why US want to have a regime change in Pakistan, and I'll be ousted just because of this fake so-called vote of no confidence motion. But some of people always criticized him for saying this. How do you see the statement?
Yes, I think I'm afraid that I'm actually agreeing with what he was mentioning. He was warning the people that Americans, like the very reason why Americans want to remove him is because he was not serving the U.S. interest in his foreign policy. So it's like for the American perspective, in their understanding, they feel like Pakistan has been so-called an ally of the United States ever since the Cold War. And during the Cold War, they used Pakistan as a tool against both the Soviet Union and against India at that time, when India was at that time more progressive than what it is right now. And in the early 50s and 60s, when India was part of the non-aligned movement, was siding with anti-imperialist movement. At that time, the United States was trying to instigate conflict between India and Pakistan as neighbors, and then to use Pakistan as a tool to exercise influence, imperialist influence over Afghanistan, and then to use Pakistan as a tool to threaten Soviet Union's Central Asia. That's what the United States was thinking about. They have been doing that.
Yeah.
Yes, they have been doing that, and then they are not satisfied because they feel like in recent years Pakistan is growing, and also like international relations has also like tremendously changed, so that the United States feeling like Pakistan is increasingly searching for more independent policy, and especially Pakistan is interested in enhance bilateral relationship with China. Enhancing bilateral relationship with China is a matter of Pakistani own judge of foreign policy. They feel like this is supporting their national interest, so they decided to do that. While for the United States don't want that thing to happen, and the United States feel like the United States' own hatred, own hostility toward China is more important than Pakistani people's idea of searching for a balanced and independent policy between the United States and China. That's why the United States was very eager to remove anyone who dares to challenge American imperialist project all over the world, especially in its relationship with China. And the United States is eager to remove anyone who's serving the interest of the people, serving the interest of the democracy of his own country, rather than serving the United States' imperialist interest in the region and imperialist ambition and imperialist conspiracy to use Pakistan as a tool against China. And we have
exactly.
we have seen this dynamic. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Clayton, as Zhang mentioned, that we've seen previously, US has used Pakistan as a tool against Soviet Union, Afghanistan, and even some other countries. But unfortunately, Pakistan could never make its independent foreign policy. But whenever Pakistan would make an attempt to have an independent foreign policy, US would attack Pakistan for that. Like previously, when there was a time of Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, his judicial murder happened. The whole conspiracy happened against him, and his judicial murder was happened. And that's still literally, people are still curious about it. What sort of precedent was set by the courts? So people still, even in a law school in Pakistan, that is taught that the killing or judicial murder of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is still in the law books. We're taught by professors that that was an unprecedented precedent, and US was behind that. And now coming back to the recent scenario of Prime Minister Imran, when he had been saying this again and again, that regime change happened, but we also have a certain class of people that they're still not believing. But majority of people, they agree to this idea because they've seen whole imperialism, and they've seen the hegemony of US in the whole world, not just in the region, in the whole world. And how do you see when Pakistan had been used previously by US? But when we talk about India, US is always a good ally with India. But when we talk about India and China relationship, Pakistan is one of the best friends of China. But unfortunately, Pakistan could never make some better economic relations with China because Pakistan is not in different multiple ventures with foreign trade agreements and stuff with China. Whereas when we talk about India, categorically they have enmity with China. They declared that we're not good friends. But in the end, what we see is China, India is in BRICS, India is in RCEP, in ASEAN, everywhere. India is making money, and India is just making their foreign economic relations better with China, despite of the fact they said that we have a strong enmity, we have dispute on borders and stuff. How do you see all of this scenario?
This is India being actually relatively cunning. This is but also it does talk about the disparity between Pakistan and between India. Pakistan is really people talk about the David and Goliath a lot. You know, David and Goliath being the biblical story where the young Israelite has a stone and he throws it at the giant and he kills the giant. But and people like to use that as to point towards Israel, to point towards Palestine, and be like, look, Israel is David. But if you look at it, the power disparity, Israel is more like the giant. But in the situation between Pakistan and India, India is most certainly has complete control over its part of the situation, and it's trying to now interfere with Pakistan's affairs. It's trying to interfere with areas that were internationally recognized, like Jammu and Kashmir, and so they locked down all internet access in there. I don't know if internet access has been restored in Jammu and Kashmir. I assume it's still locked off. Yeah, and that just gives you a little hint of what might be going around behind the scenes, because they don't want you to see it, whatever they're doing. But I think that India definitely has been a good money dump, and that's the thing. Is a lot of India's economic success. Yeah, sure, the politicians have been decent sometimes when it comes to economy, but the reality is that the U.S. looks at the situation in East Asia, they look at the situation in South Asia, and ever since the 1990s, and even before, even Kissinger brought this up in the 1980s, the next big threat was not going to be the Soviet Union. It was going to be China. That was the next rising power. And it was because as soon as they became industrialized, they were viewed by the US State Department as the unstoppable power. And so how do you beat an unstoppable power with a huge amount of manpower? You go and you fund the other country that you think can be the new manpower, the new regional hegemon to threaten. And so that's what they've been doing. They've been siphoning money into India through a variety of corporations. And this money doesn't go and benefit the Indian people. This goes into certain politicians' handbooks. This goes into the military. This goes into the military defense industry in India.
But India is actually doing all the insurgencies with the funds they're getting from US, and they're actually apart from insurgencies, they're actually planning a lot of hate stuff on their media as well.
Yeah, and you can see that nowadays. I think people talk about Russian bots a lot in the United States to talk about when people bring up Russian perspectives in social media. But if you had gone maybe 3-4 years ago and checked on like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, there was very, very little opinions and perspectives that you would hear from Indians. But nowadays, I can't go into a single Facebook group without them telling, if I were to post something like, oh, Jammu and Kashmir is being oppressed, there will be response from Indians.
You know what? My Facebook was restricted for 1 year just because I posted about Kashmir, the oppression of Kashmir, how India has been oppressing Kashmir, and what India has been doing with Kashmiris, how the curfews there, how they've cut down all the communication, like telecommunication and every mode of communication. People are actually house arrest in their places. The freedom fighters, they have been given lifetime imprisonment. Like recently, one of the freedom fighters, Mr. Malik, he was also given a conviction that he was a terrorist and mass murderer. Damn, how can you compare a freedom fighter with a mass murderer? How can he do mass murder? I mean, such weird things had been happening constantly, and it's not from now. India has been doing it just for their personal interest. And just because I posted about that thing, my Facebook was restricted for 1 year. So I mean, this is what West believes as freedom of speech. And is it really freedom of speech? If we do have a freedom of speech, then why the one opinion has to dominate over the other? We have to accept all of the opinions.
And I don't know if they like to bring up freedom of speech, but they never seem to condemn acts of aggression, because acts of aggression are the biggest acts towards speech. Is the biggest action that you can take to silence speech, and that's what they've taken in Jammu and Kashmir. It's a direct violation against the human rights to be able to express yourself, to be able to live
Yeah.
free. And now
Oh,
these freedom fighters that you talk about in Jammu and Kashmir, that many of them now, they're not being actually held in any Kashmiri prisons. They're now extradited. They're now sent to India to go be humiliated, to be tortured, to be killed in Indian prisons. So it's brutality.
exactly. Chang, what would you like to add to it so that we can quickly summarize our conversation?
Yes, yes. I would like to basically summarize that. So historically, we have abundant historical examples of the United States doing coup d'états, doing regime changes, as we have seen, and this historical vice, this historical crime, has continued in recent years. And in recent years, as a lot of former U.S. officials and even exist like right now U.S. Like current U.S. officials, they themselves admit like the United States has been doing similar things, similar coup d'états, similar regime changes in the recent years as well. And like considering the United States has a very bad record, historical record on this, and this current years of similar actions, and considering what we heard, what we have seen from the abundant evidences from the case of Pakistan, and such as the warning of Imran Khan and things like that, we are very convinced that the United States is trying to promote coup d'état, promote regime change in Pakistan. And the result and the reason, the ultimate reason why United States does so is because the United States does not want a democratically elected leader who acts according to the will of the Pakistani people, act in defense of the Pakistan as a country, as a sovereign country's desire to defend its own independent policy, to defend its own national interests. The United States does not want to see that. The United States, for that reason, removed him. For that reason, the United States is trying to remove this democratically elected leader, and as anyone who recognizes the definition of imperialism would admit, such a action of basically imposing the United States' own national interests, so-called national interests, basically imperialist interest on a sovereign country's own domestic politics by brutally interfering with a sovereign country's own sovereignty and internal affairs. All of those actions are blatant actions of imperialism. That's a classical definition of imperialism that we see at this moment. And what we see in Pakistan today is nothing but a continuation, a new chapter of this centuries-long American bad record, American vice of regime change and coup d'état abroad. Yes.
Exactly.
Could I
Yeah.
add one more
Yeah,
thing before you?
exactly. Yeah, sure. I was about to say this myself. Add one liner if you want to.
I wanted to say, though we were talking this entire session, seems very gloom, seems very depressing. We're talking about, of course, imperialism. We're talking about taking over the independent rights of sovereign peoples. But there is a sliver of optimism. There is a silver lining, and that is, if you went to the 1970s and 1980s, almost coup was very successful. It was incredibly successful. It almost always, devastated the populace. Almost always resulted in U.S. success. However, as of late 2010s, 2019, 2018, 2020, that success has slowly started to evaporate. You can see this in Bolivia. They could Evo Morales successfully, but a year later, Evo Morales came back. And a year later, Janine Áñez, the coup president, is now in bars, behind bars. Same with Juan Guaido in Venezuela. What they saw as a easy acceptance because they thought, oh, everyone's going to accept Juan Guaido, but they didn't. And the Venezuelan people hated Juan Guaido, and they supported their president even more. And see, there is a trend that the U.S.'s coups are no longer as successful as they once were. It's only a matter of time before the Pakistani people get their state back. That's the piece of optimism.
Really, really good note you've ended on, and I love the conversation with both of you. And I'm sure our viewers also like the conversation because we've talked about really deep subjects that still some of the people believe that these are part of conspiracies, but some people who study on these subjects and they've been observing and they've been reading a lot of content about it, and they've seen a lot of things practically. So that is why they understand the pain of people who are under oppression. They understand the pain of people that how their fundamental rights are snatched from them. Freedom of speech is snatched from them. Freedom of having an independent foreign policy is snatched from them. And this is maybe, I can say it as the modern imperialism, because obviously colonies can't be made like different hegemons used to colonize the states. That cannot be happened categorically now. Even that can't be happen in Africa. But there's still another part that how US have been controlling different states with regime changes, unfortunately. So the crux of a conversation went that yes, US had been into regime change of multiple states like Egypt, Iran, Pakistan, Latin America, and so many other states. So that is not something new that US have been doing. So yes, Imran Khan was also ousted under the so-called vote of no confidence motion, but which was a regime change from US. And unfortunately, I would just conclude my conversation, and I'd like to tell both of you, and my Pakistani viewers know that how freedom of speech is also snatched by Pakistani journalists these days. How journalist Imran Khan Riaz, he's actually 17 to 18 cases were made on him. Arshad Sharif, there's another journalist, investigative journalist. A lot of cases are on him. Dr. Mohit Pirzada, he's also a well-known journalist, credible journalist. He talks on geostrategic issues. All of these journalists are facing trials under court. But what happened with Imran Khan Riaz was extraordinary, like next level. We've not imagined even. He was thrown into prison, and multiple weird cases of high treason were made. I mean, how can you say that someone is convicted of high treason just because he's been speaking a lot about U.S. regime change, and you believe that this is a high treason? And his reports, medical reports shows that while he was in prison and he's on bail currently, only 1 or 2 cases has been dismissed. So he had been given a slow poison, which can kill him within a time period of a few months or maybe days, which I'm sure will be wrong, inshallah. May God bless him with a good health and long life. But just to have these concerns correct, he wanted to fly to Dubai and he wanted to have some checkups. Can you imagine his name was on blacklist and he wasn't even told about it? All of these politicians, when their name goes into ECL, exit control list, they all are informed about it. He was not even informed about that. So this is what something happened here. And everyone is so depressed in Pakistan currently just because of this regime change, political instability. And now that is why I felt that I needed to talk to both of you that how do you see imperialism then and now? So I think that is proven imperialism still exists, and that's one of the trait of hegemons, and that is why US have been doing it. And we'll quickly come again within a couple of days, maybe, again on global politics, and our viewers are definitely going to enjoy it. Thank you, both of you, for joining me, and I'm sure our viewers love this. Allah Hafiz and God bless you all.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.